The small colonial was always tidy and decorated from the 1970s. Grandma's dishes were stacked neatly in the hutch in the dining room, and only a yellow floral print armchair and sofa sat in the sparse but warm living room. We gathered around the table, covered always by an old green woven cloth, and surrounded by chairs that creaked no matter how softly a 5-year-old would sit down in them. In the center of the table, 2 bronze-colored candlesticks stood guard over the Seder plate, which was nearly complete except for the shank bone. Ours was a cutout from cardstock and labeled with the words shank bone, in case you weren't sure what it was. Grandma couldn't stomach the smell of roasting the real thing. These were special times, which I knew through my laughter and my grandfather's singing of Tu Zuzim, and at his annual mispronunciation of the rabbis' names in Bnei Brak. Grandma sat quietly at his side, chiming in just as I was about to spill the juice or drop haroset on the carpet. She was sharp, could always anticipate a mess approaching. My childhood visits with them were characterized by the things they did for me, like waffles on Sunday mornings or trips to the Cleveland Zoo. It was only when I became older that I began to guide our relationship. As an adult, I felt a sense of urgency to learn my grandmother's stories. Papa passed away at 75, and Grandma, feeling suddenly alone, moved back to our community and left her community of retired couples. I yearned more to learn about her years and hear her repeated tales of our family life. These stories taught me her values, her opinions, her fears, and her dreams. I kept asking because I loved her, and I asked further because I had a sneaking sense of anxiety over the time that she would no longer be able to share. Old age can be a perplexing part of life. We're never exactly certain when it begins or what it will be like for us. For the young, elder years appear very distant. As one ages, the picture might become clearer. Still, we know many octogenarians who refuse to equate how they feel or how they act with the number of candles they count on their birthday cake. The nature of relationships between the young and the old, and between children and their parents, says a great deal about the values of our community. At the core of how we choose to treat elders is our willingness to know and come to appreciate what this complex part of life means. What does it mean to live this experience? We characterize aging in many ways: knowledge, wisdom, gray hair, retirement homes, AARP cards. As Bible scholarship notes, the Tanakh traces life's evolution through many stages, almost like seasons. The word katan, yeled, na'ar represent youth and young adulthood, while zakein and melei yamim represent the elder, wise leaders of Israel. Ad me'av esrim, may you live to be 120. It worked for Moses. Only 3 after him surpassed 100. Joshua died at 110, Job at 140, and the high priest Yehoiada, who was Yisba Yamin, literally satiated with life, according to 2 Chronicles, dies at 130. These numbers, much like the aging process, can seem large, distant, inconceivable, and unreachable. In Scripture, though, the fullness of years expressed by large numbers signifies status and honor, more so than an accurate accumulation of time. Bible scholar J. Gordon Harris suggests in his book, Biblical Perspectives on Aging, that extreme long life in ancient literature represents exceptional achievement. Judaism teaches us how to recognize this achievement of old age. Namely, we are obligated by mitzvot to honor, revere, respect, and even fear our elders and our parents. After all, they have given us life, have sustained us, and made us able to reach this place in our lives. In Exodus, we read kabed, honor your father and mother. In Leviticus, imo ve'aviv tira'u, one shall revere his mother and father. Also, mipnei seva takum, you shall rise before the white-haired, v'hadarta pnei zaken, and give glory to the elderly. Leviticus 19:32. In both the Ten Commandments and in Leviticus, the Torah uses the verbs kavod, yirah, and hadar, honor, revere, and glorify, to frame the expectations of the child to her parents, and also the young to the old. These same verbs also define the commandments of human relationships with God. Our tradition lifts the reverence of parents and elders to the same heights as reverence for God. Therefore, as professor of theology at Boston College, Rabbi Dr. Ruth Langer suggests, children's relationships with their parents are a microcosm of their relationship with God. In the words of Rabbi Heschel, there is no reverence for God without reverence for mother and father. The actions required in revering and honoring parents evolve as life marches on. As parents age, children become progressively more involved in their care. According to Jewish law, it is expressly the child's responsibility to direct the caregiving, either personally or, if the burden is too large, through an appointed party. Both options are acceptable so long as the child ensures that the caregivers preserve the highest level of dignity and respect possible. The child then must weigh competing obligations, that of the commandment of honoring parents and the responsibility of fully living out one's own life. The Babylonian Talmud, Kedushin 31b, teaches about the difficulties of caring for an elderly parent while maintaining your own life at the same time. The Gemara brings a story about the Babylonian Rav Asi, a dutiful and pious man whose mother is a caricature of an overprotective, overbearing Jewish mom. In the story, Rav Asi's mother says to him, "I want jewelry." He provided it for her. "I want a husband." "I'll search for one for you, Mom." "I want a husband who will be as handsome as you," she demanded. Her demands became too much for him to bear, so Asi left and went to the land of Israel.
Good choice.
For in his life as a sage, the obligation of living in Israel also weighed heavily on his soul. Soon thereafter, he heard she was following him. He urgently consulted with his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan. "Rabbi, may I have permission to leave Israel?" At this presumptuous request, Yochanan forbade Asi from leaving. But Rav Asi further asked, "What if I am going to meet my mother and accompany her on her journey here?" You see, he felt guilty that he left her in order to fulfill this mitzvah of living ba'aretz. Rabbi Yochanan replied, "I don't know. I need more time to decide." After a short time, Rav Asi went back to his rabbi to ask again. This time, Rabbi Yochanan gave him permission and even a blessing to go in peace on his journey. After walking away from his teacher, Rav Asi felt very conflicted. Perhaps he had offended his great teacher. You see, Asi put Yochanan under great pressure, asking his rabbi to exempt him from this mitzvah, from this obligation to live in Israel. In the end, however, Asi learned that it was not his mother exactly that was coming. Rather, it was his mother's coffin. To this, Asi said, "If I had known, I wouldn't have had to leave her." This short tale displays the immense inner struggle that Rav Asi, a dutiful child, must confront. How can he live his life, fulfill his obligations as a Jew, both to honor and revere his mother and to live in the land of Israel, which comes first? His mother's demands drove him to prioritize Israel. Yet given the knowledge of the nearness of her death in actuality, he would have chosen to stay with her instead. In Western society, where the values of our independence and our freedom drive our development from adolescence onwards, We find it so difficult to balance the demands of being caregivers or the limits of being cared for. From behind the desks of our responsibility-filled lives, we often delegate the care of elders, perhaps more than we would ought to do, to institutions, to the field of medicine, which both do well in solving immediate problems but may devote less attention towards the whole existence of living. The words of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. I see the sick and the despised. I see the defeated and the bitter, the rejected and the lonely. I see them clustered together or alone, waiting for someone's affection to come by. I hear them pray for the release that comes with death. I see them deprived and forgotten, masters yesterday, outcasts today. Rabbi Heschel spoke these words from his essay To Grow in Wisdom at the 1961 White House Conference on Aging. He was characterizing the lives he observed in nursing homes where otherwise intelligent and spiritual beings were living a pickled existence, as he described, preserved with brine and spices. Heschel argued that in Western capitalist culture, where a man is measured by his career and his ability to make money, becoming old was the equivalent of becoming obsolete. He named two troubling issues as consequences of growing older in American culture: the fear of aging and the trivialization of life. Both of these consequences impede the reverence of the old. Each year on Grandma's birthday, I would ask her what it felt like to be her age. How does it feel to be 79, 80, 81? She smiled. She knew I meant no offense. I don't feel old, Dan. Really, it's strange. I still feel like I'm 60. Her smile would begin to fade. Everybody here is old except for me. Grandma wasn't afraid of her own aging, but she struggled to face the regular loss of those around her. By her own choosing, though, Grandma has lived in a retirement community for over 15 years. A complex institution. It contains independent apartments, assisted living, memory care units, several floors of skilled nursing, and Grandma has made her home in each section. I watched as over the years she spent less and less time with her friends, more time in her apartment or visiting with family. Perhaps this was her way of shielding herself from the inevitable process around her. Then one Sunday we got a phone call. My Jewish grandma had gone to church. She had left her room in assisted living, journeyed with her walker about a mile to the main road in the rain, and asked someone for a ride up the hill to the Catholic Church. Luckily, the priest had a good eye for spotting a Jewish grandma, and he was kind enough and caring enough to drive her back home after Mass. In the 3 years since that day, dementia has slowly eroded away the grandma we knew. In his essay, Rabbi Heschel speaks of the grandeur of human being. By grandeur, he means an infinite complexity and elegance that can only emanate from God. Part of this grandeur, I believe, is the unique ability that humans have to express such diverse forms of existence throughout a lifetime. We are constantly changing and evolving every second of every day. And in this constant evolution lies a challenge with the aging process. We don't know what our final years will be like or how we will feel, but we can imagine that we will be very different people than we are today. All of this lies and comes from the boundlessness contained in human grandeur. Not knowing what will happen as we age, and maybe not wanting to know, leads us to further distance this experience of old age from that of ourselves. Aging is something we'll deal with later. We characterize this expression of life as separate, as other, rather than viewing it as an undiscovered part of ourselves waiting to be unlocked. Like Moses' age of 120, old age is distant, inconceivable, unreachable, unimaginable. Perhaps this is why Torah teaches us to revere parents and elders in the same way we revere God. I imagine God's existence, whatever it may be, as one very removed from my own sense of living life. But the act of reverence, the feeling and expression of yirah, narrows this division of great distance. Drawing close to God is possible. We walk down the long hallway, lined similarly with green carpet and illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. A quick right turn into the open door is Grandma's room. She's sitting there in her chair next to the bed. She's sleeping. We stay around her for some time. Grandma, no response. Grandma, I hold her hand. We've come to say hi. Only peaceful breathing is heard. After a few minutes, though, her eyes begin to open. She sees us, but doesn't question our arrival. Instead, she looks across the room at a picture of my son taped to the wall. "That's a pretty little baby," she says. "What's her name?" "Grandma," I said, "that's Eitan, your great-grandson, my boy." Her face brightens. A familiar smile breaks through. The grandeur of being human.